Hi, good to be with you again. So, why pursue a spiritual practice? Why bring our attention, our intention to knowing the spiritual dynamic of this human spiritual experience that we're having? It's actually the human experience that we're having. The spiritual nature of our being is the most enduring and essential nature of our being, having a human experience. So we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And yet, most are paying very little attention to their spiritual nature, which is the most real part of us. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, breaking it down very simply, if we look at the human spiritual experience as recognizing our humanity of being a combination of the body and our brilliant, beautiful mind and our ego construct, which is the story we have of ourselves, the image, the idea, the identity of self that we've created, and our emotional body, the mm, the feeling center of what we think and what we've experienced in the past. All of these make up the personal self that will end someday. And our spiritual nature, our soul self, and the oneness, the one consciousness, it individuates through individuated souls, soul expressions of its self, of the oneness. That soul God essence, that soul source dynamic of ourself is our spirituality. And yet we pay often very little attention to that because we're consumed in the story of self. We are lost in the content of the personal experience, of the human experience, and we forget our most divine nature. So, why bring our attention to what I call our wholeness of being, the full dimensionality of our being? We start to come to recognize that to know thyself is the path to freedom. To truly know thyself, to know your mind, to know your conditioning, to know your programming, to know any wounding, trauma, story, egoic construct, to know how your story was put together, how it is a construct of mind and doesn't really have a real reality to it. But to recognize that we live in this human experience with an egoic sense of self, and to really see that for what it is and for what it's not. The ego is not who you really are. It's a construct of self that you've developed and you're going to work with and shift and shape. This is what we talk about when we say rewrite your story. So there's that dynamic of us. And we're often working with it because it's not always behaving. The egoic construct isn't always behaving. Our story isn't always kind. We know, I call it the noise in our head. Our noise of our own story is so consuming. We're trying to get it to behave, to get it to feel good. And in so doing, we typically are ignoring the dynamic of us that is already at peace. The wholeness of our being, the self beyond the mind, the self beyond the story, the essential nature of being, God's being, which is our being, we're typically not attending to that because we're struggling in some way with our story, with our mental, emotional, and physical experience. And not to say that we're not going to attend to our mental, physical, and emotional experience. That's a part of this human experience, part of our beautiful humanity. But what I'm inviting here is that we bring a fair amount of our attention and awareness and intention to knowing our wholeness, our divinity, our grace that is already present. I heard a wonderful phrase once by a minister at I think it was a Unitarian church. And she said, when we are disconnected from our divinity, we will feel not enough. We will have a sense of not enough. We'll have a sense of there is something significant missing. And since we don't know that it's the knowing of our own divinity, the abidance of our own divinity, since we don't know that that's what's missing, we will have a sense of what's missing, and we'll try to fulfill that emptiness through the world of form, experiences. I must need more happy experiences. I must need more fulfilling experiences. So we'll always be chasing fulfilling, positive, happy, enjoyable experiences and resisting and denying and turning away from things that don't feel good. And often the things that don't feel good are dynamics of our psyche, of our ego, of our story, of our wounding, our fears and our doubts and our uncertainties that need to be allowed so they can be loved. I've done other videos on that you can find here. But for today, I just want to invite the intention and the devotion to bringing your awareness to the most real part of you. This is, I think, mainly what I wanted to talk about today. We're ignoring the most real part of us, and we're struggling with the illusion. We're struggling with the story. We're trying to work the story and get the story to behave. And it does for a while, and then it doesn't. And then we think we got it going, and then we're triggered. We go on holiday with our family, something, we get triggered, and our story is activated again. And we deal with that, or don't, or avoid it, or deny it. But in some way, that's the only experience we're having. It is the experience of the personal self. And that's going to end someday. It's the least of who you are. And in fact, your ego story is the very least of who you are, because it is a made-up construct. Isn't that wild? That we would often go through this life and not attend to bringing our awareness to awakening as who we really are. And we would spend most of our time attending to the very thing that we're not. Who are you really? And we will discover this through the studies of non-duality, self-realization. We will discover the wholeness of our being through meditative self-inquiry, to learning how we might sit in meditation and inquire beautifully and intentionally into the very nature of our being. We will listen to guides, teachers, others who are paying attention to their wholeness of being, that have a devotion to knowing their spiritual nature. So that's the invitation here today, is to recognize that the most true part of you is often not known because it's not being attended to, it's not being intentionally awakened, revealed, abided, known. And most of our attention is thoroughly in the story and in the drama of the personal self. And that self, while very important in this world of form, in this incarnation, is not the wholeness of you. It's not even close to the wholeness of you. It's a sliver, it's a blip, it's a momentary experience in this incarnation. The soulful nature of our being that endures, that is eternal. To not know that, to not have a sense of that, to not have that awake and alive and there in the background of all the personal experience, is to get lost in the content of experience and to forget, to not know, to turn away from the most true aspect of who we really are. So, find the studies that align for you. I recommend, for me, it's been the studies of non-duality, self-realization. It's everything it's why I do the work I do. It's why I do everything, pretty much everything that I do, is to help others awaken to this beautiful freedom that I now know. The freedom of true being. The freedom of just being. And being able to see the conditioning and experience the conditioning or the programming or the stories, the habits of mind that bubble up, and not get lost in them, not get trapped by them, not even to believe them, but to be primarily rested as the eternal nature of God's being, individuating through a soulful expression in this temporary incarnation as a human vehicle. Bring your awareness to the wholeness of your being through your meditations, through your studies, through your deep self-inquiries into the nature of reality. All right, blessings, my friends. Be well.